Guys, UFC 308 is going to be one of the biggest events of the year by far, I think. You know, in a year where we've had really, really crazy events, UFC 300, The Sphere, just passing, just to name a couple off the top of my head, we've been really spoilt for events and fights this year. In the main event, I think one of the best, most anticipated fights that you could make in the sport. Ilia Topuria, who's at the absolute top of his game right now, coming into his own, 15-0, undefeated, just knocked out one of the pound-for-pound kings, Alexander Volkanovski, to become the featherweight champion, is facing Max Blessed Holloway. Max Holloway, what can you even say about Max? One of the most loved fighters in the sport, who's had one of the most insane career resurgence over the last few fights. You know, he lost 3 fights to Alexander Volkanovski, and people were saying, you're done, retire, you know, you're past it, you're over it. And what does he do? Fights all of the up-and-coming featherweight contenders, beats them all, goes up to fight Justin Gaethje for the BMF title at lightweight in a fight that no one gave him credit in. Like, you know, everyone was saying Gaethje's going to knock him out. Max is never going to be the same. And what did Max Holloway do but put on, you know, I think one of the best performances in history and created, I think, if not the best moment in UFC history, pointing to the octagon, the last 10 seconds against an absolute savage in Gaethje. So the way that this fight is being put together, where these two are meeting in their career at the moment, it's fireworks. It's absolutely electric. Holloway, Topuria, how the style is going to look. Amazing boxing by Holloway. He's got such crisp boxing, and he's able to implement that so well against, you know, pretty much everyone that he fights. On the other hand, Topuria, who has beautiful boxing as well, a different sort of style. He likes to sit down in the pocket a bit more, throw power punches, loves digging to the body, coming over the top with heavy overhands. And Topuria has a really interesting presence in the octagon. His footwork, his pace, he really lets the fight come to him. He doesn't rush too much. You know, he's rarely overextending. You know, he's been able to pace himself more and more, and he looks like he's hunting his opponents down. The Volkanovski fight, Volkanovski looked, you know, on the first watch, he looked in control in that first round. You know, since watching it again a few times, Topuria just looks like he's just tracking Volkanovski and just waiting to land. And you see when he does land, he shut Volkanovski's lights off. Like, Topuria hits really hard. Not only for a featherweight, you saw him fight Jai Herbert at lightweight, you know, a few years ago, and he put his lights out as well. So this guy has real punching power. With that being said, Holloway's never been knocked out, been dropped sort of once by Gaethje in his last fight, but what can you say about Holloway's chin? It's one of the most legendary chins in the UFC. How those two are going to clash and match up is going to be absolutely electric. I'm really interested to see how Holloway is able to implement his kicking game. If Topuria is able to mix in his wrestling and grappling, because his grappling is what got him to the dance. You know, he's on an amazing knockout streak and his striking's really come together. But he's a black belt, and watching him in Cage Warriors, watching his earlier regional fights, the guy was a submission machine. You know, he submitted Bryce Mitchell. He's got really good grappling, so he's got the ability to really threaten Max, I think, in multiple areas. So I'm really interested to see how that is going to look, how Max is going to be moving on the outside, finding his range, picking the pace. So what a main event, what a fight. I'd say, you know, I'm looking forward to this fight and the co-main event equally as much, and those two are some top-tier fights. Let's get on to that co-main event. Bobby Knuckles, Robert Whittaker taking on Khamzat Chimaev. Wow. This fight was supposed to happen a couple of months ago. Chimaev pulls out just 10 days, 12 days from the event. Whittaker, like the true savage that he is, says, I'll fight anyone here. And he accepted a fight against Aleskarov, who was a pretty unknown prospect, but super skilled and super hyped. And, the real ones knew how good that guy was, even if he hadn't had the ability to show it at the top level yet. Whittaker accepts the fight and goes out there and stops him in the first round. Beautiful performance. Absolutely beautiful performance. Whittaker's at the top of his game right now. His mentality as a fighter is really admirable. You see him own his mistakes, own his losses, and really just try to be the best version of himself that he can be. And he's one of the most humble, likable dudes. And he fights like an absolute killer. On the other side, Khamzat Chimaev, undefeated prospect. When this guy came into the UFC, he was one of the most hyped prospects ever since McGregor. What he was able to do to these guys, ragdolling people, pretty much until the Gilbert Burns fight, he was virtually untested. His case has been really interesting as he's been absolutely plagued by injuries, which has really affected the hype and the trajectory of his career, unfortunately. There's also been some visa issues with his ability, I think, to fight in the USA, which again limits, his ability to stay active. Last fight, he had to pull out due to an illness. And this is, been a reoccurring theme for him. I think he got really sick during COVID. And I just don't think his immune system has been the same. Like, the guy trains, you can see, like an absolute savage. He's pushing his body to the absolute limits. And I think overtraining is a real thing. He struggles to make it to the fights, which is concerning for a guy that young. When we actually talk about the fight, how the styles match up, Whittaker's a big underdog, and I think he's being overlooked here a little bit because, as you saw with Chimaev coming in fighting Usman, he looked really good for the first round and a half, and then he started to fade. This fight is 5 rounds. Whittaker's not going to fade. Whittaker's going to be sharp the whole contest, and if anything, you saw in his fights with Yoel Romero twice that guy can dig deep and he'll never quit on himself. So I think it's going to be really interesting if Whittaker can make it past the first 5 to 10 minutes, because although Chimaev's going to be electric and on fire in the first 5 minutes, he starts to really fade, and I think Whittaker is going to be able to implement his game going forward past those first 2 rounds. So if the fight makes it out of the first 2 rounds, I think Chimaev's going to be, going to be in trouble. But that's what makes this fight so exciting and entertaining, because is Whittaker going to be able to survive that onslaught? Because Chimaev comes out so hard. Also, this is Chimaev's first 5-round fight. So is he going to pace himself in a different sort of manner? Is he going to not come out super hard? I think that would be detrimental to him, because I think if he sticks back and tries to go punch for punch, skill for skill with Whittaker, he's going to get lit up. His fury, his pace, and his aggression is one of his best attributes and things that he makes himself, makes him so dangerous. So like I said, what an exciting fight. That one's going to be super interesting. Looking forward to breaking it down a little bit more as it gets closer. Like I said, this card is top to bottom, absolutely stacked. Just running down quickly, Ankalaev, Rakic. Interesting fight for Ankalaev, because you thought he was walking into the title fight with Pereira. So to have him in this position with Rakic is interesting, who's just coming off a knockout loss to Jiří Procházka, who just lost to Pereira. So I don't know why this fight's happening per se. Ankalaev, I thought you could have given him a title shot 2 fights ago, but here he is. With him fighting a month later, it's interesting why the Pereira fight isn't happening. Here we are. Rakic, I think, is going to be overwhelmed in this fight with Ankalaev, but you never know. Those guys are really big, so anything can happen in that division. Shara Magomedov, the Pirate, is back. They're giving him a really favourable matchup here against Armen Petrosyan, who's another kickboxer. I think it's going to be an awesome, technical, exciting fight on the feet. A good one to open up the main card. You can tell they really they enjoy Magomedov in the UFC because they're matching him up with strikers, with guys that he's going to put on an entertaining fight against. You can tell he's not maybe as well-rounded as he needs to be to enter that top 15 or to be at the top of the division. So it's interesting to see how he'll go against Petrosyan, because Petrosyan's quite a decorated kickboxer himself. It's going to be quite an interesting stylistic clash. The prelims are some of the most stacked prelims in recent memory. Lerone Murphy, Dan Ige, that fight could headline a fight night. Lerone Murphy, up and coming, he's streaking. And, Dan Ige is about as benchmark of a test as there is to enter the top 10 at featherweight. So that is going to be a really electric fight. I think Lerone Murphy, he's a really, really well put together prospect, fights out of a good team, and he has really high fight IQ, and it's one of his biggest weapons that he's able to implement. Jeff Neal versus Rafael dos Anjos is an absolute banger. That fight is going to be back and forth. I don't know how RDA has had this strength of schedule. That guy has fought absolutely everyone there is to fight at lightweight and welterweight. He never turns down fights. He's fought absolute killers, only ever loses to the best. RDA is, about as big of a Hall of Famer as you'll get in the UFC. And this matchup is just another example of that. Jeff Neal, the younger guy, the more powerful guy, the better boxer. We'll see how much RDA has left against, a pretty, like I said, a pretty powerful, dangerous boxer in Jeff Neal. Orelbai versus Rebecki is going to be, that fight's going to be crazy. Orelbai's a really interesting prospect coming up at lightweight, and Rebecki, again, the same. Two really good grapplers. Orelbai's a bit more well-rounded, a bit more dangerous on the feet, I think. So, like I said, the more you look down this card, every single fight is worth tuning in. Absolutely no bathroom breaks. Fakhretdinov is back against Ruzabayev. It's crazy when they go to Dubai. You've got to be so on top of the pronunciation of the names. I feel like I absolutely butcher all of these Eastern European ones. That fight, though, is going to be really interesting because Ruzabayev sort of, his hype was sort of imploded in his last matchup, and Rinat is so well-rounded, really sort of interesting fighter in that division. So a lot of grappling going to be taking place in that one, I think. But like I said, top to bottom, I think this event is, maybe behind UFC 300 is one of the most stacked events of the year. Cyril Gane, Alexander Volkov at heavyweight, another absolutely incredible fight. Rematch, these guys fought a few years ago in the main event of a fight night when Cyril Gane was on his way up, Will that fight look any different? It's interesting because although Volkov has improved and has gotten better, I think it's a really tough stylistic fight for him. But that being said, thank you guys so much for joining me. I look forward to breaking up all of these matchups in more detail as the time gets closer. We're super spoiled with events coming up. UFC 307, UFC 308. Cannot wait. Two back-to-back great pay-per-views, but this one's a standout. So yeah, thank you guys for joining me.